Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Stay Ahead of Your Next CJIS Audit. My name is Melissa Russell, and I'm going to be the host for today's session. Before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that we are recording today's session, and we will make a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recording available in a follow-up email. If you happen to have any questions during the session, please go ahead and throw them into the Q&A. Our presenters will take questions during the presentation, as well as save a little time at the end for some questions as well. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to you, Chase.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, really excited to be here to talk about criminal justice information services audits, everybody's favorite, most exciting topic that they like to get into early in the morning, late at night. So, thanks everybody for being here, whatever time it is for you. And I'm mostly just going to be walking through a couple of the slides and talking through a little bit of the topics. And Jeff Gonzalez here is the subject matter expert that's going to be diving in deep and getting into the nitty-gritty and actually showing some product and use cases around CJIS and how to stay ahead of any upcoming audits or just make sure that you're meeting the CJIS requirements for any devices in your environment that are in scope for it. Jeff, you want to give a little bit introduction and background on yourself and what you have to do, why you're the expert on CJIS here?
Yeah, sure, Chase. So, hello, everybody. So, my name is Jeff Gonzalez. I've been with Eclipsium for a little over a year and a half now. So, I'm the sales engineer. So, I'll be covering all things sort of technical related. And I cover quite a bit of, I work with quite a bit of sort of local, state agencies that are required to, deal with CJIS audits. So, that's why I'm sort of here today to sort of give you the perspective of the product side of things and how we can help you with your CJIS audit. So looking forward to today's conversation, and please feel free to answer any questions while Chase and I are sort of going through the content.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to keep this interactive. So, this is for the audience. We're glad that you're here, and any sort of specific stuff that you want to dig into, throw it in the Q&A, and we'll either answer it right then, or if it's about a topic that we have coming up, we'll save it for when we're already in that topic so we can sort of cluster the content together by relevance. So basically the way we're going to do this is we'll walk through a couple of slides talking through the general scope of CJIS and then getting into specific control areas that Eclipsium supports, which are also some of the more difficult controls to achieve. There are areas of the CJIS controls, particularly in the most recent release, CJIS 6.0, which is not that new. It's from like December of 2024, so it's been around for a while, but there are certain controls that are pretty well covered by existing security tools you might have in your environment. You may have to do some reconfiguration or expand the deployment, but they're well covered. And then there's certain controls that probably require some net new tooling or new approach. And some of that is stuff that Eclipsium helps with really well in the firmware integrity, device integrity, and hardware level. So we're going to talk specifically about those controls, but we're happy to answer questions about really any aspect of CJIS and CJIS audits and just talk about what we're seeing in the field and the realm of technologies that can help achieve CJIS compliance. So we'll walk through individual controls. We'll do a pretty fast look at individual controls that we're going to talk about from the control families that Eclipsium supports, talk about the evidence artifacts that you need, the sort of gaps between existing approaches and what you might need to change. And then after a quick run through of the slides, we're going to get into actual product demo, and that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. We'll talk about how we can actually support um, specific needs before your next CJIS audit. So yeah, for starters, CJIS 6.0 sort of a shift from 5.9.5, the previous version, towards the need to be able to prove that you have met the requirements with continuous real-time visibility into the environment. So it's no longer enough to have documented controls and policies and everything or control mapping. You have to have live visibility and real-time capability to prove in your environment that the controls are met. So you have to have operational evidence that you're in compliance. You have to be able to prove that your systems are trustworthy. So any systems that are interacting with criminal justice information services, um, it's not going to be enough to have documented policies and procedures. It's not going to have enough for the system owner to assert that their systems are in compliance. A spreadsheet-based inventory isn't really going to cut it. You're going to have verifiable sort of technical visibility into the actual devices to prove that they're up to date. And you're going to have to be able to export an artifact that is mapped to the control and say, like, here's the real-time current view of these devices that demonstrates at this moment that we're in compliance. Jeff, I'm curious, from your perspective, when you're in an environment that you know is working on improving their CJIS coverage, what are the typical gaps that you notice? Like, where are they really solid? What's like already under control? And what are the areas where it's like, okay, this is something that needs to be leveled up before the next audit?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think having vulnerability management tools are sort of commonplace today. And so we go beyond being just being able to detect vulnerabilities or ICDs, in that we're able to detect um, risks and threats, 0 days, things like rootkits, backdoors, implants, and other types of risks that should be remediated, should be understood in the environment.
Yeah, right on. Well said. So for this conversation, we talk about what kind of devices or systems are in scope. And I think often it defaults to talking about endpoints and workstations. That's a very obvious use case. Anything that is accessing criminal justice information or criminal justice information services is subject, but it also includes application and database servers, firewalls, VPN appliance, router switches, anything that's handling criminal justice information has to be compliant with these. And some of these, particularly firmware and embedded components inside of these devices, are not as frequently in scope for other security programs in the organization. So a lot of the times these requirements can be fulfilled with existing tools that you have in place, for other reasons. You have security tooling in place you didn't bring it on board to comply with CJIS, but it can do that for you. But when we talk about devices, hardware, embedded components, and the firmware on them, that's something that is kind of out of scope for a lot of other security programs and tools. And so there's not already a tool in place. And we find that this is an area that a lot of our customers are looking to sort of check off that they don't already have a system in place that can check it off for them when it comes to becoming compliant with CJIS. So that's what we're going to focus on when we get into the actual controls. There are a handful of control families that Eclipsium covers, and a couple of them that we really tend to focus on because they are designated as priority one in the latest release, and because they are sanctionable. So if you're found to not be in compliance, that can have consequences. It has more teeth. There's these long timelines. Jeffy and I were talking about this yesterday as we were preparing for this. You'll probably say it better than me, actually. Can you say a little bit about the different control families and sort of what it means for something to be a priority one or to be sanctionable currently, and how that's driving priorities inside of actual customers that are using us for this?
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of, I guess, folks were given a lot of directives in terms of the CJIS requirements all at once. I mean, I think the CJIS, requirements is like a 495 page document. So there's a lot to cover, a lot to do to get an existing environment, compliant with CJIS. So, they've taken a phased approach and put priority levels, P1s, P2s, P3s, and then, giving folks time to sort of address the P1s first, right? And then, eventually, the P1s became sanctionable, where, you could be, penalized for not complying with something that's like at a P1, right? And eventually the cycle of, phasing in what's sanctionable will continue on over time. So that's sort of the differences there, between having different priority levels, and to give folks a time to, get their house in order before things, certain requirements become sanctionable. And that's just commonplace, but I think with a lot of other similar types of compliance requirements, like I think maybe folks even have to deal with CMMC, and that's sort of relatively new, a little bit further behind the CJIS at the moment in terms of what's sanctionable, because I don't think nothing's sanctionable at the moment because they're giving folks the runway to get their house in order. So that's some of the key differences there, and so we're able to show you which CJIS controls, which devices need attention for the specific CJIS controls that we have that are within the scope of what we cover, and also we also have the ability to enumerate those by priority level, so it's easy for you to sort of target the ones that you need to address first before an audit.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, is that the scope of the CJIS controls is huge. Like you said, it's like borderline 500-page PDF. Um, and then the different devices or systems inside your environment that it might apply to could also be really broad and variable, and you might not have unified visibility or a single pane of glass, as some might like to say, into all of those different devices. And something that I think we've done really well is put together that console that for a large range of different device types inside of an environment can tell you specifically which ones are in violation or at risk of being out of compliance for certain of these control families and certain of these controls. So I think this is a good time to remind people that we would love to take questions. If there's a specific control family that you are interested in talking more about, we can. Otherwise, we're going to kind of focus on the ones that just we've seen the most demand for, interest in, or coverage for among people that come to us about it. And also, I want to put a question out to the audience and see if anybody will just throw any sort of answers in the chat about what your overall level of attention or focus is that you're paying on it. Obviously, you're here in this webinar, so this is a topic of interest, I hope. And I'm curious, do you have like budget you've got to use for the end of the year? You have an upcoming audit. What caused you to, be looking into this topic right now, and what do you need to get done in order to, fulfill your needs? I'd be really interested. Either questions or comments from the audience about that. But so yeah, a big part. I'm going to do a super quick sort of speed run through some of the specific controls that we listed back here. Like we said, these slides are going to be available as a reference for you after the webcast, so we don't want to, spend too much time on slideware when we can get much more into an interactive demo, which I think is going to be more compelling. But at any point, if you want to go back to a specific control and talk about it, totally welcome to. But yeah, configuration management, CM8. This involves system component inventory, and just having an accurate inventory of system components and knowing about their firmware and their embedded components. And we've got a list of the various evidence artifacts, the types of information that Eclipsium can surface and export for you to demonstrate. CM2, this is one that is sanctionable now, I believe. So baseline configuration. This is something that Eclipsium is really strong at, something we'll look at in the product. And Jeff is going to sort of demonstrate what it looks like to have a baseline configuration of your systems and components, and the ability to detect a deviation from those approved states. Configuration CM6, so risky device and firmware. Are risky device and firmware configurations controlled? Configuration settings requiring whether you have enforced or you're monitoring the secure settings and able to manage exceptions to those. Are you monitoring vulnerabilities across the real attack surface? So risk assessment is another big one that we're able to support and offer vulnerability monitoring underneath in sort of areas of the hardware and componentry of your devices that are not being monitored by other vuln manager or threat monitoring systems. System and information integrity, the SI area, the SI family, is a huge one for Eclipsium. We find that system and information integrity is an area where a lot of agencies or organizations that we interact with do not have the coverage level that they want yet. And so we're able to fill in a gap in the security tooling to achieve the SI, the system and information integrity levels. Thank you so much for the shout in the comments. This is just answering a question. So we've got someone in the audience whose role is management of cyber risk for 70 PD stations. including vulnerability and pen testing. Interesting. Okay, so vulnerability and pen testing, you're doing some proactive work, some vulnerability management. And so are you directly responsible for certain CJIS requirements, or is that something that someone else in the org is like coming to you to help for, but it doesn't roll up to you, but you're responsible for executing on certain parts of it? I'm always curious how the sort of roles and responsibilities are delegated for achieving these goals inside the organizations. So yeah, thanks for chiming in. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so yeah, SI7, another one of those P1s, sanctionable now. This is software, firmware, and information integrity, being able to detect unauthorized changes, employing integrity verification tools. That's us. And establishing trusted known good references for comparison. That's really Eclipsium's bread and butter. Like we have the industry leading database of known good firmwares, known good binaries that we're able to compare against. And we do, for some of the customers that use us for this, we'll do automated firmware updating, which is something that we can just help you not only know whether you're up to date and identify systems or devices in the environment that aren't up to date, but uh, update those things on either a regular cadence, fully automated, or keep humans in the loop. But just sort of reducing the friction, make it easier for you to stay up to date and within compliance. Jeff, I've been kind of yakking for a while, and we're getting some good comments.
Yeah, yeah, I've been
What else?
itching to
What
jump
else
in
would you say
here.
about this? Like,
Yeah,
talk
on
about
this
it.
particular topic, yeah, I have to say a couple things about this one because this is really one where that really sets us apart from everything else that's out there, makes us unique in the space. I think, the heart, of our patented technology, right? So we have the patent on having the ability to scan a device, and be able to extract the running firmware of that device in order to perform the assessment on it, to do an integrity validation, to see if you can trust the firmware or the software, right? Firmware and software can be used interchangeably, that's deployed to that device, right? And then be able to take what's deployed at runtime and then be able to compare that against the reputational database that Chase just mentioned, where we have, I think, something along the lines of 15 million known good images of various makes and models, a universe of makes and models of the most widely deployed devices that are out there. And so you're able to determine whether the integrity of the device is being maintained over time. And that directly aligns with the SI7 requirement to have an integrity monitoring tool in order to be compliant with that SI7 requirement for CJIS.
mission critical mission critical stuff that is, as far as I know, we're kind of the only game in town that does this, um,
Right.
which is very cool. And yeah, I'm excited to get in and look at the demo. So I'm gonna yeah, keep rolling through the slides real quick. Again, this is just sort of good reference material that you guys will all get in your inbox afterwards. So SI4, device and firmware signals are part of monitoring. Do you have detection coverage across the environment, including device level signals? So hardware level signals inside of these devices. And then this is just a visual of the sort of layers where in a device you have the application sort of user level and the operating system that other vulnerability scanners, conventional scanning technologies can do. But you've also got firmware, you've got embedded components. There are chips in any device, any laptop, server, even network devices like routers, that essentially have it's a computer within the computer. It has its own whole operating system that will often operate separately and at a higher privilege level than the operating system of the main device, that just isn't being monitored. And we see these being targeted more and more by nation state advanced persistent threat groups, and just cyber attackers in general, because they're highly privileged and often unmonitored, which means they're a great place to hide. And often, especially stuff like firmware and component chips are not getting updated as frequently as like the main sort of userland operating system on a device. And so they will go out of date and they'll have vulnerabilities that haven't yet been patched in them. And as long as the cyber attacker can reach those, It's a really convenient place for them to establish a foothold, not get detected, and use that to send out feelers and eventually move laterally into other parts of the device. So this is sort of the area where Eclipsium helps achieve coverage that is explicitly required within CJIS. You know, CJIS specifically references firmware and integrity in the documentation, which is why so many organizations have come to us for that, since that's something that we have focused heavily on developing our capabilities around.
Yeah, I mean that's right. I mean, I think the call out there. I mean, I've seen a couple of different various compliance requirements for different industries, and I'm seeing a trend where they're actually defining further the terminology of just software. Right, it's too broad, right? And actually putting in the verbiage for firmware to make sure that not only are you sort of focusing on the top two there, which is applications and operating systems, but that you're also looking at embedded components and the firmware that's running on there, and it's specifically being called out in not just here for CJIS, but other industry compliance requirements. So.
Yeah, there's increasing awareness of it. When we were talking about the sort of timelines and the rollout, the prioritization, and then when there start to be sanctions or penalties, it reminded me of the DOW Zero Trust roadmap, where it's been years, right, since that's been in the works. And there's been various deadlines for when folks have to achieve various sort of levels of compliance with it. But so far, there hasn't been a lot of talk about, there hasn't been necessarily a lot of budget specifically unlocked or allocated towards it, and also not a lot of talk about penalties. But, you know, it takes a long time to roll out these kinds of regulations across a big industry. Um, and that can kind of sneak up on people when there's sort of a regulation or a guideline that's out there that doesn't have teeth, or there haven't been a lot of audits happening, and then all of a sudden audits do start happening and there do start to be sanctions or penalties in place. So we find that the organizations, I think, check me if I'm wrong on this, Jeff, but I think organizations that sort of get ahead of it and are like, okay, we know that this isn't um, we're not going to get sanctioned right now, but this is something that's going to take us a while to deploy and roll out and achieve. And if we do it now, it's going to save us some pain later. Uh,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if I think of like, this is sort of just to do comparisons against other industries that are sort of making these changes and focusing on the firmware side of things in terms of a device that should be compliant in that area, because it's a key area where the threat actor can gain persistence, right? It's an overlooked area for a lot of other security systems. If you look at like the healthcare industry, where HIPAA is a major, healthcare industry compliance requirement, it hasn't been updated in, I don't know, 15 to 20 years. And then the currently proposed changes, there are many, but that don't have anything to do with firmware. But there are ones that are specifically, making changes to the terminology of changing the terminology of software and specifying software and firmware. And if you look at those the current requirements today, firmware is nowhere in the requirement. But if you look at the proposed changes, I think there's like 12 or 13 additions and changes to adding the terminology of firmware, and really focusing on that from a compliance requirement for devices. So I think just focusing on firmware is getting a lot more attention, even beyond having to meet compliance requirements, even in sort of the big banking industries where they're really following recent Verizon data breach incident reports and other industry reports like the Mandiant report, and really some of the headlines takeaways from those reports is that threat actors are really focusing on exploiting vulnerabilities in devices that are being overlooked. So it's an area of focus that's getting a lot more attention across various industries.
yeah, absolutely. We got some good questions and comments here that I'll just pull up. And pretty soon we're going to get into actual demo here. So that's very relevant to this. We've got a cybersecurity auditor for a state CSA asking, how do you guys approach agencies that have restricted budgets, not as technically knowledgeable personnel, and work to explain what your products can provide per each policy control and what they need to go to other vendors for? That's exactly what Jeff is going to do in the demo. He'll pull it up and say, like, here's what we can show and the types, here are the controls that we can cover. Here are the devices it's our demo environment. So we've got some devices that are specifically out of compliance in order to demonstrate it. Um, and here's what you would need to go to other vendors for. So we'll get into that in a minute. It's a great question, one we get all the time, and we love helping folks sort of understand where the boundaries are of like which vendors can cover which parts of this sort of large, wide-ranging set of requirements. Uh, so we've got another comment in here from someone who performs CJIS readiness and risk assessment for municipalities and state contracts. Someone had brought up that they represent the insurance carriers, and so I re-asked the question in the chat of whether insurance carriers are looking at CJIS when it comes to pricing or even, providing insurance coverage or not. Sounds like no. General cyber insurance looks more broadly at cyber and AI risk. And then this person ends with a question of being curious to hear thoughts on the use of AI in a CJIS environment, which, yeah, I mean, AI kind of is dominating the conversation all over the technology landscape, right? I would guess that there's not a lot of really specific written regulations with teeth about using AI in a CJIS environment, but that it is that organizations with devices that are accessing criminal justice information services are probably being extra cautious about rolling out AI usage, and that's the right way to go because just given my own experience and sort of what we see in customer environments, whether the AI systems are, ingesting the data that you expose them to, what they have access to on a device when you connect to them. I think that there's a lot of questions, and my guess is it'd be really challenging to maintain a clean separation of systems that are accessing criminal justice information services from AI systems that you let into your environment. And so uh, I think that organizations that are using AI in environments that also have devices that access criminal justice information services should be pretty should be pretty cautious about having those systems together on the same device or even on the same network. Um,
Yeah.
so this is sort of just another visual of what Eclipsium adds to existing CJIS programs. It's really the hardware level visibility, down in the firmware, the components, the chips on the devices, the physical hardware. These are areas that are either strongly implied or increasingly explicitly referenced as must cover in CJIS and various other requirements. And Eclipsium is kind of the only game in town for covering some of that stuff. So yeah, Eclipsium is able to essentially go, from a control requirement to delivering an actual evidence artifact. And I think probably this is a good time to dive into the demo, Jeff, because this is what we're saying is like for any of these controls, integrity, um, component inventory baseline configuration, we are able to give you a specific artifact that's like, here's the real-time status of this device with regards to this. And that's what we show in the product. So I'm going to stop share. Jeff, if you want to pull it up and walk us through actually how that works. Meanwhile, I'll keep looking at the questions and comments in the chat. Thank you guys so much for participating in that way, and we'll keep talking through them either during the demo or afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Chase. Yeah. So let me see. So I'm going to make an attempt here. So to sort of take all we do, the telemetry that we get by scanning devices, and then sort of, funnel that down, into, how it directly maps to CJIS compliance, right? So, you know, our core capability really is around understanding the trust that you can have for a device in terms of the firmware that's running on it, as well as any firmware or microcode that's running in lower level board components like CPUs and GPUs, right? Um, and also being able to understand any risks that a device may be harboring as well. And so, because of that deep focus at that level, at that attack vector, it directly aligns with some key CJIS requirements, right? So I want to sort of walk you through at a high level what our core capabilities are, and then directly sort of map that and say, okay, well, how does that help you for identifying whether you're going to be able to pass your devices will pass CJIS compliance, or whether your devices need attention, and which ones and for what reason, right? Is it something with the SI2 flaw remediation that some of your devices need attention on? Is it going to be the sort of the more challenging one, which is to have an SI7, have an integrity monitoring tool and understand if there are any unauthorized modifications to boot firmware and which assets they are. But I want to take a step back before I do that and kind of just tell you kind of how we're able to provide this level of detail and expertise around CJIS. And I think I first need to talk to you about sort of what are we doing, right? How does it work, right? So essentially, we're essentially we call ourselves a supply chain technology platform, and it's because you're able to determine whether some key aspects about the provenance of a device, and making sure that from the time a device is making its way through the supply chain from a vendor, right? You ordered something from Dell, you ordered something from HP or whatnot, and it makes its way maybe direct to you, maybe it arrives at a VAR, but there's various steps along the way. And so we provide a way for you to scan that device and be able to attest to whether the firmware on the device has undergone any changes. Has there been any implants, backdoors, rootkits, and any other type of malicious code? Has that device been exposed to it? So we really focus on those two pillars, which is can you trust the device and whether it's harboring any risk. And then the areas of sort of inventory, we're going to inventory those devices in a number of ways. One is you'll have a full inventory of your entire state of your devices, anything being monitored by Eclipsium. So you'll have sort of that single pane of glass view. And then below that, you're going to have a view into at a device level, right? Into an inventory of all of the components and the integrities and any risks that individual components of a device could be harboring. And so what we're looking at here on this page is a Dell Latitude 5550. Right. So we have coverage for not just, we call these endpoints, they're client PCs, right? Or it could be a desktop. We also have coverage for servers. So servers running Windows operating systems, Linux operating systems, for endpoints running Windows, Linux, Mac. But we also have coverage for networking devices to be able to provide this level of information as well, and so that you can understand if network devices like routers, firewalls, and switches are also CJIS compliant. And so, hey, Jerry, I see a question in the chat there. Yeah, we do have coverage for cameras, specifically for Hikvision and access cameras. Anything that's sort of not specifically covered, we can easily extend coverage for devices. Right? So anything that is sort of connected on a network that's IP based, and that's including phones as well. I mean, we recently, we've done deep discovery on numerous phones. My most recent project that working on now with a customer has to do with a Grand Stream, a VoIP phone, where we're doing complete teardown of it, understanding any vulnerabilities at the end. It's running Android, and so we can extend coverage very easily. Just to answer your question. So going back to the information that's on this page here, this endpoint and the components or the widgets here on this page are basically going to fall into that pillars of trust and risk. And so when we scan a device for endpoints and servers, you will deploy our endpoint sensor. Right? It's a software sensor you deploy to those devices. They scan the device. They collect the relevant information about the firmware. They extract the firmware. They send that information back to the Eclipsium backend, which is the backend is the analysis server. All analysis of the data that gets collected from devices that are scanned are processed off box, right? So there's no performance hit on the device itself because all analysis is happening on a backend server. we offer a SaaS model, so we host the backend or the analysis server in your own private instance in Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure, GCC High, and so. Um, For networking devices, the deployment is slightly different. You cannot deploy a sensor to a router, a firewall, a switch. So for that, you would set up a sort of a virtual machine sensor and deploy our network sensor to that, and then that sensor node will communicate to your networking devices to conduct a remote authenticated scan. So that's a little bit of sort of how the deployment of it. After that information is collected and analyzed, it's presented here. It's accessible via our management console. The data and all this telemetry is accessible via our full REST API as well. So you can integrate it with other CMDBs platforms, SIM source solutions, vulnerability management solutions, risk management solutions, right? So anything that can access it via REST API, you can access all of this data. So once that's back, these widgets here, we're going to focus on sort of the trust of it. And so when we look at known good firmware, one of the things that we're looking at when we process that data is we're going to do an inventory of all of the binaries of the firmware, all of the hashes of the firmware. We're going to take that back, and then we're going to compare that against our known good reputational database of the firmware to be able to understand if something is missing, if something is not right. Is there a binary on there that we've collected that isn't part of the golden image? Is there a hash on there that just isn't part of the known good hashes that are on there? So we're doing that integrity validation on there in order to understand whether you can trust the device. We're also looking at the firmware reputation of the device to understand if that particular make and model of device is known to run that particular firmware image of it. We're also looking at things that fall into that threat category, right? So indicators of compromise, and we're taking our analysis engine is populated with various sorts of intel, our own proprietary intel that comes from honeypots, intel that comes from third-party sources. And so we're looking for known bad as well, right? But while we also look for known bad, we're also looking for things that are not known, right? So things that would fall into 0 days or rootkit and bootkit variants. So variants of known bad, we're also looking for by way of our heuristics analysis. So we perform a heuristics analysis in order to be able to determine anomalous behavior. And we do that by decompiling the firmware that we extract off of the device and breaking it down to raw code sample and then running it through our heuristics analysis. We're also doing emulation and doing runtime asset behavior. So we're really looking at this device to see if you can trust it. Can you trust it? Can you trust the firmware that's deployed on the BIOS and the UEFI? Can you trust the firmware that's not just on the BIOS and UEFI, but at lower level components where other types of backdoors can be introduced? So you can introduce the software backdoor in the form of malicious code, and you can add a hardware backdoor by switching out a compromised module like a network interface card, right? And other things. And so here we give you the breakdown, the integrity verification of all of the various components that we have visibility into. So everything from the TPM, processor chipset, Intel management engine, if it's a server, baseboard management controllers or iDRACs and ILOs, right? We're also able to see the management microcode or firmware running on those as well and be able to understand, is the vendor firmware that's deployed to that particular component, does it match up with the known good image? Is there a threat or some other risk, either known bad or unknown, that's targeting these particular areas has persistence in these particular areas and has compromised these particular areas. So this falls into sort of various things that align directly with the CJIS requirement, which is having an integrity monitoring tool, being able to inventory the environment, being able to look at firmware in this way and understand if you can trust it and if it's authentic. If it's authentic to be deployed and to run on that particular device. These other widgets down here fall into a slightly different category, which is risk. So you can have a device where you can have trusted firmware running on it, but it can still harbor risk, right? So by risk, the areas of risk that we look at are the BIOS configuration settings in a secure way, set in a secure way, or they be hardened? Do they have any existing vulnerabilities? Are they running any out-of-date code on it, right? And so some of these things on here, like indicators of compromise or threats, will fall into sort of that flawed remediation if you align it with the CJIS requirements. So if we take a look at like a SI2, and we see that, you got to have a tool that can identify, report, and corrects information system flaws. So here are all of the various vulnerabilities that we've detected in this demo environment where we have various implants. Right? There's a lot of bad going on in this environment, and we see that we're calling out all sorts of things in terms of vulnerabilities or flawed code in different areas, not just the BIOS UEFI, but these could be targeting some of those other lower level components like the Intel Management Engine remote privilege escalation. We have an SMI backdoor here. We have outdated microcode. We have a flash descriptor unlocked. And if you notice here, you'll see that here, assets need attention in this particular CJIS SI2 requirement. And then when you can drill down further and see the 33 different assets that are being impacted by this particular flash descriptor. Like, what is flash descriptor? Why is this relevant? Well, we provide you with some intel and information, and we enumerate what this particular vulnerability is, and we enumerate it in a number of ways. So we provide you an overview of it. We give you a description of it. We tell you the recommendation to remediate it. We give you other third-party sources of information related to this particular vulnerability. And any recommendations how to resolve it. And we also give you sort of the related CVEs if it's been exploited in the wild. And then we give you an understanding what the blast radius looks like for this particular vulnerability. So, what other devices in the environment are impacted by this particular one vulnerability, right? So we show you the information and take you down the road of, telling you what it is, how to remediate it, and understanding sort of the full scope of impact in the environment. So we go back here. So in the areas of risk, another area would be sort of changes over time, or being able to track changes over time. So because we're grabbing and collecting the firmware from the device when we perform a scan, we have a sort of a point in time scan of what's deployed to it. We know what known good looks like because we have a reputational database of known good firmware images for all of the makes and models that are out there. We're constantly crawling the OEM sites for whatever the latest firmware is. And so that's how we're able to determine if you have firmware that's out of date versus firmware that's up to date. If you wanted to, you can use our platform to remediate having out-of-date firmware and use us to deploy the vendor's firmware to those devices. So you go ahead and, typical, scheduling a task, right? Or scheduling a deployment type of activity where you would say, tomorrow or Saturday, I want to, at 12:01 a.m., I want to be able to deploy, this firmware across to all the devices. And here's the BIOS password of it, that's required and set on the device. And then you would schedule it. And then the next time that device reboots, it would deploy the vendor's firmware. So, that's how, baseline, we're able to sort of track things over time and remediate as well. So another aspect of sort of tracking changes over time is, or being able to understand, like, if one device is slightly different from another device in the environment, is the ability for us to sort of use one device as the model of settings for a particular group of devices, and then create a profile of that device. And if the other 99 other Dell Latitude 5550s, are sort of slightly different from that one, we would call that out in our asset profile setting. It would see a suspicious marker here for not complying with the original asset profile that we've defined for that particular make and model of device. So other areas that we're able to look at in the areas of risk are hardening. So we're able to call out, what particular settings, UEFI settings on the device are in a secure mode versus an insecure mode. And so what we do is part of the information that we collect from the device when we do the scan is the BIOS configuration information. And then we compare that against a CJIS level 2 framework to be able to determine if that particular setting is in a insecure mode or secure mode. So if you need secure boot enabled, and that's the standard across that should be applied to all of your devices, you can easily get a sense of which devices are not in secure mode in a number of ways. You can start at the asset level and sort of go down the road of, okay, looking at this particular UEFI setting, you can see the blast radius below and really understand how many of your devices are sort of out of compliance in terms of not having secure boot enabled across the board. And so that ties back to, a lot of the things that I'm kind of going through here really tie back to, some very specific things on CJIS. So, SI2 flaw remediation, really is being able to see the vulnerabilities that are detected, not just at an asset level, but more of an estate, full view across the board of all devices that are being scanned. SI7, being able to look at the assets that are seeing integrity failures, which I showed you a couple already, right? So being able to go in and say, yeah, there's 228 devices that have not passed an integrity check for one reason or another. And if I look at this device here, this particular desktop, we can see that it's there's a lot of bad things going on here, from having an SMM backdoor to seeing suspicious sections in the UEFI binary, to not passing that initial integrity verification that I explained earlier, which is is it running known good firmware, and we can see that it isn't. Is the firmware currently deployed to this device known to be deployed to a device like this? Is it triggering any detections on any of the IOCs as well? And we can see there's loads of detections going on here, and we can see that for the most part, the components can be trusted. There's no compromise in those lower level components. So in terms of like TPM, you're not going to see any risks related to a compromise in the TPM. Same thing with your network interface card and your PCI devices and the Intel management engine or the processor chipset or the GPU. Really, the compromise is here down at the UEFI and the BIOS, and this is where we're seeing the integrity failure occur. And so this is where you would target your attention in terms of what you would need to do to remediate. And we can see that this is the risk report just for the BIOS and the UEFI. And we can see that we're going to enumerate all of the vulnerabilities that get detected. Here we can see the implants that we've implanted on this device, which is a SMM backdoor, and then give you information about what this is about and why this detection was triggered, as well as we see a double detection here. So wherever you see something that's a compromise, that really means that there's actually an actual payload on the device, there's an artifact on the device, there's a full-on compromise, and there's malicious code running in that area that we identified. Wherever you see something that's in a suspicious, something that would need attention, that's something that has triggered our heuristics analysis, right? Where we're seeing something that isn't expected, right? We don't expect, for example, to see this particular writable execution section and have a malicious binary there, right? That's just something that shouldn't exist in there. So it's something that you should look at. So along the lines of the information you're seeing on this risk report is, again, being able to tell you which binaries have failed that integrity verification. So essentially the heart of why the SI7, it was flagged for needing attention for that SI7, right? Is because there's something wrong with the integrity of the binaries being that are currently deployed to the firmware on this device. And if you look at, the binaries that we're checking, so we're checking 523 of them, one of them failed. This is the hash of the a particular binary that failed, right? And you're able to export that out and do a forensic analysis, right, post-mortem, along the lines of tracking changes over time. So having an integrity monitoring tool that can track changes over time is, our ability to compare and have a firmware scan history. And so what we do is we are always comparing the most current scan to the previous scan to understand if anything's changing every single time we do a scan, right? And so if there was a change here, something was introduced between these top two scans here, we would see a change marker, a change badge here indicating that there's a change that occurred, and we would highlight that change. Same thing for we're tracking for the firmware configuration settings as well. So whether BitLocker is enabled or TPM is enabled, right? Those types of settings on here, we're also tracking from scan to scan and comparing current scan to previous scan, and we can see that between this scan here and this scan here, something has changed, and we can see the details of that and actually go and see that these are all the individual UEFI configuration settings, and we can see that which ones have not changed and really target and focus on to which ones have changed. I can see that DBX was modified, potentially indicating a secure boot bypass control, right? There. So, again, these are just other ways to give you sort of clues as to what's going on in the environment beyond just telling you that NSI7 control is either passed or needs attention. So let's see here. Going back to,
We got a pretty
go
good
ahead.
comment in the chat that I just want to address right now because it feels relevant. So Jeff is going really deep right now in
Yeah.
visibility. Someone left the comment, I've seen some CJIS audits, but none to this degree. Is this mostly large district or statewide deployments? And Jeff, I'm curious, like
It's
how
both.
often?
It's both. Yeah, it's both. So I've worked with, going back to, there was a question at the start of this. It's like, I've worked with, small sheriff's office where, it's a captain and some of his staff they're sort of required to do some of this, and they just need something easy. All right. So again, and I've also worked with the larger organizations, sort of state agencies, where they have sort of larger deployments and more staff. So this helps with both. And yet, so during this call, I went into quite a bit of depth in terms of visibility, because at the end of the day, you want to know, you want to be able to know if your device, we want to make it easy for you to be able to say green or red. Your devices are compliant or they're not, or they are not compliant, right? That's the easy part of it, right? You want it all to be passed, right? You want it all to be green, and that's all well and good. And we can tell you the ones that need attention, and that's great too. That's going to help you as well. But then I think once, we do start seeing things that need attention, you're going to want to be able to understand at a deeper level, why does it need attention? And that's where we can help you out there. Because if something needs attention beyond some of the more simpler stuff, like having out-of-date firmware, and you actually, there's a threat and a compromise in your environment, you're going to want to understand where that threat lies in the firmware, and we can take you there. Right. So if all you need, and if all your role is responsible for, is to really understand at a high level whether you've passed or failed, I think, we check that box, right? And you don't need to go any further than that. And then you can sort of kick that off to sort of an incident response team, an MSSP or someone else, and have them look at it further and chase down the, what needs to be addressed and remediated. And you can give them a head start by providing them this report, right? And providing them access to this console where they could start seeing, where the bad things lie. So so
Yeah.
we went yeah, we went quiet. We did quite a bit, quite a range here. I thought it would be a little bit more interesting beyond just kind of showing you, yep, we can cover SI2s, SI7s, and we kind of went beneath the surface a bit. But at the end of the day, this is how we're helping state, local districts. Like we'll work with the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office will do it, and then they'll kick us over to the local, their local board of elections department that also has to go through CJIS. And so, we'll expand our way out as more folks within a district or within in a state need to address a CJIS requirement and need a tool like ours to help them do it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's like we can show you sort of red, green, very simple. And for some folks, that's all you need, but that's not where we stop. We can go a lot deeper, which when you have a vulnerability or you have an attack, the deeper level of detail that we can provide can be really useful. Another relevant question, I think, that gets back to an earlier topic that we talked about what we do versus where you're going to need to go to another vendor. Somebody asked about whether we're able to cover other types of devices. You already covered off on phones, and cameras, and as long as those are IP connected, network connected in that way, we have some coverage already, and we can extend. We're always adding new devices to our coverage list based on demand. But you also asked about access systems, and I had a little sort of clarifying conversation in the chat about whether that meant physical access systems like door, badge scanner, or key fob type of things, or even biometrics, they brought up. And that's sort of a mixed bag. For key fobs and those sorts of like devices that someone's carrying on a person they would scan, that's not something that we focus on or cover at all. Typically, the actual scanning pad or the little thing that you tap on to get in would be network connected, and that's how you would sort of manage the permissions about who's allowed to get in with which fob and provision new fobs and stuff. That's not something that we cover today, essentially out of lack of demand. I think we haven't been requested to cover that kind of thing before, and that might be the kind of thing that it's not an endpoint that's accessing criminal justice information directly. It's not network infrastructure. It's not our wheelhouse. Like typically we start with endpoints like the ruggedized laptop, the tough book or whatever in the squad car, and then move into more network infrastructure, routers and switches and firewalls and stuff, um, at the precinct or at wherever it is. That sort of other physical access technology is not centrally what we do, and you might need to look for another vendor for that. Another question, total other end of the spectrum. How do you detect hardware Trojans using CJIS techniques, considering that some Trojans and hardware components activate under specific environmental conditions such as humidity or only after a device has rebooted a certain number of times? These Trojans remain undetectable while dormant. I mean, if you have someone that's putting a hardware Trojan in the ruggedized laptop that only activates under certain humidity conditions, you have a pretty advanced threat actor coming after you, and you're going to need to take you're going to need to take some more extreme measures. As far as detecting those, we are doing hardware level like root of trust measurements to see what is in the hardware and whether taking the attestations from the hardware itself as to what's there. You know, a threat actor who's embedding hardware in the device can get as advanced as they want. I don't know if there's ever been a real like documented case of that sophisticated of a hardware Trojan. We are able to detect things like counterfeit components, or unexpected hardware in the device, but it does have to be communicating at some level with other devices. Um, there are various attack mechanisms that can persist beyond a reboot or remain undetectable, and we have detections for a lot of that kind of stuff. So I think the best answer to that is that it's sort of a case by case basis. In a case where you're dealing with a really sophisticated hardware based attack mechanism like that, we have a lot that we can do. and we've invested a lot of research in that kind of thing, but the frontier is always moving. So it's a fun area, but it's not typically something, as we've just discussed, it's not typically something that we run into in a normal CJIS context. So we are running right up on time. Jeff, is there any further stuff you feel like you really need to get in on the demo, or shall we just sort
Well,
of?
I'm all set. I think I said enough, and I think I have a lot more to say, and it'll take me more than 45 seconds to do it, and I don't want to go over on time. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. I hope I hope I was able to give you some informative information, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So we've got the rest of the slides. There's a little pre-audit checklist, just what to validate before the auditor asks. Just some more sort of summarization of what kind of stuff we can cover for you. And as we said, you'll get a copy of the slides and a copy of the recording after the show. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to be here. Thanks so much for chiming in the chat, for sharing about your experiences and asking questions. Always makes it a lot more engaging. So I appreciate everybody for being here and participating in that way.
Thank you, Chase and Jeff. And I did want to remind everyone, if you do want a certificate of attendance, if you are submitting it for CPE credits, please go ahead and do that. And thank you all, and we'll see you on the next set.